3, 2, 1. You pushed the button and your head went back and your eyes went up, and that rocket tore a white line straight through the Saturday morning sky until it was nothing but a dot against the blue. And somewhere behind you, your father was watching the same dot, shielding his eyes, smiling at something he couldn't name. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. You remember the first one? You saved for it. Maybe it was your birthday money. Maybe it was 3 weeks of mowing lawns. Maybe your dad just came home one afternoon with a flat box from the hobby shop and set it on the kitchen table without saying a word. And you knew. You knew before you even opened it. The Alpha. That was probably your first. A white cardboard tube, a balsa nose cone, 3 plastic fins, a sheet of peel and stick decals, a 12-inch nylon parachute, a rubber shock cord, and a set of instructions that made it sound more complicated than it was. You spread everything out on the table. You squeezed a thin line of glue along each fin and pressed them into the slots, holding them straight with your fingers while the cement dried. You sanded the nose cone until it was smooth. You slid the engine mount tube into the body and glued it in place. You tied the shock cord to the anchor inside the tube with a knot your dad showed you. You folded the parachute just like the instructions said, accordion folds, then rolled it tight, then tucked it into the body tube above a square of wadding that kept the ejection charge from melting the chute. The whole thing took an afternoon, maybe 2. You painted it, whatever color you wanted, whatever was left in the tester's rack at the hobby shop. Red, blue, silver, yellow with a black nose cone because you thought that looked like a real missile. You pressed the decals on while the paint was still slightly tacky so they would stick flat. And when it was done, you set it on the shelf next to your bed and looked at it and imagined what it would do when you took it outside and pointed it at the sky. Saturday morning, you carried the launch pad in one hand and the rocket in the other. Your dad carried the controller, a small plastic box with a safety key and a red button and a wire that ran 20 feet to the pad. You walked to the field, the one behind the school or the one at the edge of the neighborhood, or the one at the park where nobody cared what you did as long as you picked up after yourself. You set the pad on flat ground. You slid the launch rod through the lug on the side of the rocket. You peeled the cap off an A83 engine, black powder in a cardboard case the size of your thumb, and slid it into the motor mount. You pushed the igniter into the nozzle, 2 thin wires with a tiny bridge of nitrome filament that would glow white hot when you sent current through it. You plugged the clips into the igniter leads, stepped back to the end of the wire, and put the safety key in. Your dad looked at you. You looked at the rocket. The wind was still. Nobody was downrange. Everything was ready. 3, 2, 1. You pushed the button and the igniter flashed and the propellant caught and the rocket left the pad with a sound you can still hear if you close your eyes. Not a boom, not a roar, but a sharp, hot hiss that lasted maybe 2 seconds and then was gone. And in those 2 seconds, the rocket climbed so fast your neck hurt from looking up. The smoke trail hung in the air like a chalk line drawn on the sky. The engine burned out. The rocket kept climbing on momentum alone, invisible now against the blue. Nothing but a speck if you could even find it. And then, pop! The ejection charge fired. The nose cone separated. The parachute bloomed open like a small orange flower 1,000 feet above you. And your rocket, the one you built with your hands on the kitchen table, floated back down to earth in slow, lazy circles while you ran underneath it with your arms out, trying to catch it before it hit the ground. Your dad was running too. That smell! You remember the smell? Sulfur and cardite and something sweet underneath, like burnt sugar mixed with smoke. It hung in the air for 10 seconds after the launch, and you walked through it on the way to recover your rocket, and it clung to your shirt and your hair and your fingers for the rest of the morning. Your mother knew where you'd been before you walked through the door. She could smell Saturday on you. Not every launch was perfect. Some of them were better than perfect because they went wrong. The time the parachute did not deploy and the rocket came down like a spear and buried its nose cone 2 inches into the dirt. You pulled it out, checked for damage, replaced the shock cord, refolded the chute, and launched it again. The time the engine spit the nozzle out the back and the rocket went sideways into the parking lot and you ran after it praying nobody's car got hit. The time the wind caught the parachute and carried your rocket over the tree line and you spent an hour looking for it in someone's backyard, and when you found it hanging from a branch, you climbed the tree without asking permission because that rocket cost you 2 months of lawn money and no branch was gonna keep it. The time your 2-stage rocket lit the sustainer perfectly and the booster fell away tumbling and the upper stage screamed straight up and disappeared. You never found it. You looked for an hour. It was gone. Somewhere out there in a field or a gutter or on someone's roof, your rocket is still sitting. You think about it sometimes. You never replaced it. That was Estes. That was what happened every Saturday morning for 1 million boys across America for 30 years. You didn't stop at the Alpha. Nobody stopped at the Alpha. You came back to the hobby shop the next week and you looked at the wall and you saw the Big Bertha, wider body, bigger fins, room for a B64 or a C65 engine that would take it twice as high. You saw the Honest John, a scale model of an actual Army missile with olive drab paint and white lettering. You saw the Cherokee D, your first 2-stage rocket where the booster lit the sustainer in mid-air and the whole thing screamed upward in a way that made your stomach drop. You saw the Mean Machine, 4 feet of body tube on a single engine that flexed when it flew and always got a reaction from anyone watching. And you saw the Saturn V, 3 feet tall, 5 engines, a scale replica of the rocket that took men to the moon. That was the progression. That was the hook. You started with an A motor and a single-stage rocket that went maybe 300 feet. You graduated to a B, then a C, then a D, which took a bigger rocket and a bigger field, and more wadding and more nerve. You learned about thrust curves and delay charges and what happened when you put a C6-3 in a rocket designed for a C6-7. The ejection charge fired while it was still climbing and the nose cone blew off at speed and the body came down like a lawn dart. You learned about wind and angle and weight and drag, not because anyone taught you, but because the rocket taught you. Every flight was a lesson. Every crash was a better lesson. You sat on your bed at night with the Estes catalog spread open on the blanket. It was maybe 40 pages, printed on cheap paper with photographs and illustrations and descriptions of every kit they made. You circled the ones you wanted with a pencil. You added up the prices. You calculated how many lawns you'd have to mow. You turned to the engine section and counted the packs, 3 engines per pack, with igniter and wadding included, for $1.75 or $2.25 depending on the size. You figured out what you could afford this month and what would have to wait until next month. That catalog was your wish list and your budget and your flight plan all at once. The hobby shop was the other place, the real place. You walked in and the bell rang and the man behind the counter nodded and you went straight to the Estes section. The kits were on the wall in their flat boxes, organized by skill level. Level 1 on the left, the Alpha, the Viking, the Gnome. Level 3 on the right, the Cherokee D, the Omega, the Citation Patriot. And on the counter, in a display rack, the engine packs, a 8-3, B6-4, C6-5, C6-7, D12-3. You knew the codes like a language. The letter was the total impulse, how much push. The number was the average thrust. The number after the dash was the delay before the ejection charge fired. You picked your engines based on your rocket and the wind and how high you wanted to go and whether you wanted to risk losing it above the clouds on a calm day with a D12. You counted your money, you picked your engines, you bought the recovery wadding, those little squares of fireproof paper that went between the engine and the parachute, and you walked out with a paper bag that weighed almost nothing and contained everything you needed for Saturday morning. Some of you ordered by mail. You filled out the form in the back of the catalog, wrote a check or taped a money order to the page, put it in an envelope and waited. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and when that box showed up on the porch with your name on it and the Estes logo on the side, Christmas had come early and nobody could tell you otherwise. Some of you did this with the Scouts. Tuesday night meetings in the church basement or the school cafeteria, and the Scoutmaster pulled out a box of Alpha kits and said, "We're building rockets this month." You built them together, 10 boys, 10 kits, 10 rockets, and on the last Saturday of the month, you all went to the field and launched them one at a time while the troop watched and the parents stood behind the cars and everyone counted down together. 3, 2, 1. 10 rockets, 10 countdowns, 10 parachutes in the air, and the kid whose rocket went highest got a round of applause and carried that for the rest of the week. There was a merit badge for it. Space exploration. You had to build and fly a model rocket to earn it, and the Scoutmaster signed off after watching your launch, and that badge went on your sash next to first aid and camping and citizenship in the community, and you were proud of every one, but you were proudest of that one because you built a machine that flew. None of this happened by accident. It happened because a 28-year-old contractor named Vern Estes, the son of a fireworks maker in Denver, Colorado, solved a problem that no one else could solve. In the late 1950s, boys were building rockets in garages and backyards using homemade motors made from match heads and gunpowder and anything else that burned. According to the American Rocket Society, 1 in 6 of those experiments ended in serious injury or death. A scientist named Orville Carlisle designed a safer engine, but he could not make them fast enough. He called the Estes family because they were the first fireworks company listed in the Denver phone book. Vern did not just make engines by hand, he built a machine out of scrap. A steel table, hydraulic cylinders, and power steering pumps pulled from a Buick. No electrical wiring anywhere near the propellant because a single spark would turn the whole operation into a crater. He called the machine Mabel. Mabel produced one finished rocket engine every 5.5 seconds. 10 a minute, 600 an hour. She ran on compressed air and determination, and she was the reason model rocketry became a hobby instead of a headline. Vern's first kit was the Astron Scout, a rocket so small it fit inside the shipping tube he used to mail engines. He sold them by mail order through ads in Mechanics Illustrated and Popular Science. In 1961, he moved the company to 77 acres outside Penrose, Colorado, a tiny town that became known as the model rocket capital of the world. The National Association of Rocketry grew alongside him, from a handful of clubs to more than 1,000, running competitions and setting safety codes that made it possible for a 10-year-old to launch a rocket in a public park without anyone calling the police. And then the moon happened. July 20th, 1969. Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon, and every boy in America looked up at the sky and understood for the first time that the rockets they were building in their kitchens and launching in their parks were connected to something real, something that was actually happening right now on television in front of the entire world. The country was going to space, and so were they, 300 feet at a time, on an A-83 engine in a field behind the elementary school. Your rocket was not going to the moon. You knew that, but it was going up. And up was the same direction Armstrong went, and that was enough. Estes sales surged. The Saturn V model kit, almost 3 feet tall, the crown jewel of the catalog, became the dream. Hobby shops stocked deeper. Boys Life ran the ads every month. Scout troops launched every weekend. The hobby had never been bigger and would never be this big again. In 1969, Vern sold the company to the Damon Corporation out of Massachusetts. Damon bought Century Engineering, a competitor, and merged operations in Penrose. By 1983, Century was gone. After a hostile takeover of Damon in 1989, Estes bounced to hobby products. In 1996, the company absorbed Cox Products, the same Cox that made the 0.049 model airplane engines your channel already covered. The name became Estes Cox Corporation. In 2010, it was sold again, this time to Hobbyco, a massive hobby distributor out of Champaign, Illinois. And in January 2018, Hobbyco filed for bankruptcy. The company that owned Estes, Tower Hobbies, Great Plains, and dozens of other hobby brands was gone. Within 60 days, they announced they would run out of operating cash. Liquidation was coming. Estes, the brand that invented the hobby, the company that Mabel built, was about to be sold for parts. A family named Langford stepped in. Dr. John Langford had been flying rockets since he was 12. He knew Vern personally. They had stood on the same launch fields, flown at the same NAR events. In April 2018, the Langford family bought Estes out of bankruptcy court for $7 million. Ellis Langford, 33 years old, became president. And Vern Estes, who had built Mabel in a fireworks shop 60 years earlier, stayed on the board. He is still there. Vern Estes is 96 years old. He still shows up at NAR events. He still signs catalogs. He still remembers the sound Mabel made when she was running one engine every 5.5 seconds all day long, the heartbeat of a hobby that did not exist before he built her. The company survived. The kits are still made. The engines still ship from Penrose. You can buy an Alpha on Amazon right now, build it tonight, and launch it tomorrow. But the world that made it matter, that world is gone. The hobby shop where you stood in front of the Estes wall and picked your next kit is now a cell phone store, a vape shop, or an empty storefront with a sign in the window. The field where you launched every Saturday is a subdivision now. Someone built houses where your rockets used to fly. The scoutmaster who signed your merit badge is retired or he is gone. The catalog you circled with a pencil on your bed is now a website. Boy's Life is called Scout Life now, and the print edition is a shadow of what it was. And the moment itself, the countdown, the button, the hiss, the smoke, the white line against the blue, the parachute, the run, that moment still exists somewhere. It exists in parks and fields and club launches where a few dedicated people keep the tradition alive. But it's not Saturday morning anymore. It's not every kid on the block. It's not a million boys looking up at the same sky and believing that the rockets they built with their hands connected them to something bigger than a field behind a school. Some of you came back. There's a name for you. They call you BARs, Born Again Rocketeers. Men in their 60s and 70s who walked into a hobby shop or clicked on a website and bought their first kit in 35 years. You built it at the same kitchen table or a different one, but your hands remembered. The glue, the fin alignment, the shock cord knot, the parachute folds, it all came back like you never left. And when you took it to a field and set it on the pad and put the key in and counted down, you felt something you hadn't felt in decades. Not nostalgia, not sadness, something closer to coming home. Your kids were grown. Some of you brought your grandchildren. A 9-year-old girl pushed the button for the first time while her grandfather stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder. And when that rocket left the pad, she screamed and he cried, and neither of them could explain why, and neither of them had to. That's what Estes did. It didn't just sell rockets. It sold a moment between a father and a son on a Saturday morning in a field that doesn't exist anymore, with a countdown that lasted 3 seconds and a memory that lasted a lifetime. Vern Estes is 96. He built a machine from scrap metal and Buick parts in a fireworks shop in Denver, and that machine created an industry and a hobby and a million Saturday mornings. He is still here. The rockets are still here. The engines still ship from the same small town at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. The field is what's missing. The field and the boy who stood at the end of the wire with his finger on the button, and the father who stood behind him, and the sky that had no limit. If you were that boy, you know. And if your father was the one standing behind you, tell him while you still can. Tell us in the comments, what was the first Estes rocket you ever built?